Welcome back, everyone. My name is Fire. The market's looking pretty good here. A lot of these coins are getting ready or in their breakouts. Bitcoin already has, and it's testing some key resistance right here. More or less, I'm expecting some consolidation until the Wednesday FOMC announcement, and then I think it's going to be make or break. So let's take a look at some of these charts. Bitcoin. All right, let's take a look at the Bitcoin chart here. So we were watching this trend line from the last video. We've nicely broken out of that. Nice little retest right here, resumption, and we hit this resistance up here. So one of the favorite modeling techniques that I like to use is something called CRT, or turtle soup. A couple people will brand it a different couple of ways, but the main idea is you're looking for old swing highs. In this case, we have the capitulation bounce rally. That sets a nice little wick over there. And then you can see we had a beautiful trade into that resistance right there. And since then, we sold off. Now what you can do, so I'm not sure if this is actually going to hold the market or if we're going to be able to consolidate and break up. Last time, I believe I drew some arrows that showed the consolidation. So far, step number 1 is done. Maybe we're going to hang out a little bit more until Wednesday. So I wouldn't expect a whole lot of excitement on Bitcoin until Wednesday. But I think these two lines over here are going to be the draws. So let me go ahead and clean up some of these arrows. Let's take a look at the daily. So one of the most powerful patterns that I've always found is this inverted head and shoulders. And you can see a pretty clear activation line right here at about 116. Now I'm not sure this is true, but I read somewhere that inverted head and shoulders are more likely to play out. So I think this is going to be something to keep an eye out for. What I would recommend here is put an alert here at about 116. Let's go ahead and do that together. And we're just going to be waiting. So I think right now, if you were watching the charts, it was fine to take some profit into this first test over here, especially once you saw the rejection. This is the hourly time frame, but you got a little bit of displacements right there. Maybe you take some profit into that retest, and then you consolidated a little bit. It did look like a little bit you were going to break out and continue going, but ultimately we fell all the way back to the old swing high over here. Let me see if I can actually draw this a little bit better. So that 113,770 looks pretty crisp. I like the clean touch right there and the clean wick right there. Those look really good. So the name of the game is just going to be consolidation. Let me clean up this line right here. Let's come back to a bigger time frame like the 4 hour. I don't think there's a whole lot to do right here. I think you're either going to be de-risked in time for FOMC, or you're just going to be waiting for perhaps a bigger test. I would like something like the 111 if you're going to be bullish as the deepest test you would go. That comes from this imbalance over here. Or if the market just wants to reverse here on a dime, continue going up forward using the nice wick over here as your base. So I still think that upside is more likely. I wouldn't be too aggressive chasing the longs right here, especially ahead of Wednesday. It'd be perfectly fine if we do break out. You're very likely to get a retest and enter there. The big point though is that I think we can also reverse here. So I'm starting to see a lot of the Elliott wave people. They're calling for this October 6th being the top. This also matches the Wyckoff schematic that I showed in my first channel video. So you do have to watch out for that one. One last little thing we can do before we leave the Bitcoin chart is look at our Fibonacci extensions. So my eye is drawn to the swing high up here. Let's take this down to the swing low. You have a little bit to go until you get to the optimal trade entry, OTE, at about 117, 118. My eye is drawn probably to this level right here, which is your 120. So I think that's your maximum upside if you are going to be looking for trying to top tick the short. I think that's going to be where you're going to be wanting to look. But as of now, I think we're just going to be waiting. If you wanted to be very aggressive on the smaller time frames, you could have entered a short right here. What that might look like is something like this. So we're going to be targeting that little imbalance. You can pick this a couple of time frames. I usually like the 4 hour, especially for external liquidity, but this one's a little bit more smaller time frame. So perhaps what you would be looking for is, I see this imbalance right here. Stop loss above the old swing high. And then use target any external liquidity. So perhaps your Target would be down here. That looks like it lines up with our imbalance over here. Beautiful little short there. Ethereum. Okay, Ethereum is following our roadmap. So far we have held that nice daily swing low over there. I'm going to clean up this chart a little bit. I don't really think we're in this fractal anymore. I think the consolidation is going to go on a little bit further. We'll see how it goes. Maybe by Wednesday we get the big breakout and I'll eat my own words here. But just to clean up the chart a little bit, I'm actually going to just start us fresh. It's always good every once in a while to clean up the chart, declutter everything, and take a fresh set of eyes on this. So what do you guys see? So my eye is drawn to these swing highs up there. I still think that'll be a very strong target. I see the imbalance here that we're currently forming. So if you are bullish, what you're going to be looking for is ideally buying into your about maybe your consequent encroachment right there, maybe about 4K. That's a nice psychological level. You would target then first target 4,300, ultimately that 4,700. So if we're bullish, I think we're going to be wanting something like this. But now, that being said, let's take a look at the bearish case. So we are starting to fill out this bigger imbalance over here from the very big sell-off. So that range is being respected. You do have a lower low over here on the daily, closed under the wick over here. So I do think you have to assume until you close above the high over here that we're in a downtrend. We didn't even take this wick out over here. We're not really even equal highs, so Bitcoin was able to sweep its equivalent. So you do have that resistance to contend with. It's still going to be weighing us down. Let me just go ahead and draw that line a little bit more on the wick. And let's see what else we got. So like Bitcoin, I think we're just going to be consolidating. Most likely, we're going to spend a lot of time around this 4K area. It does look like we are rejecting here. So if we look perhaps at the 4 hour, I would expect we took some minor liquidity. Yep, we did there at about 42.18. So it makes perfect sense. And I think we're just going to be chilling out here in this box, whether we break bull, whether we break bear. One thing that is starting to concern me is that some of these altcoins are a little bit weak. You can see some of the equal lows here. They're not very, you would like this angle to be sharper if you're in a more of a defined bull trend. That way the equal lows aren't quite clustered. But as of now, this is a pretty flat trend line here. I would say you're at a risk here, and I'm not starting to like this chart anymore, especially if you lose the swing low over here at about 39. At that point, you're also under the 4K psychological level. You're under the daily imbalance we drew. You're starting to breach the sell-off imbalance. So a lot of bad things are happening. For sure, I probably would have taken a little bit off of here. You could have done a bit of a SMT trade with Bitcoin. So as Bitcoin was trading into its daily turtle soup, you could have taken profit on your altcoins, which is pretty much what I did. So a lot of these alts, they pumped a little bit. Some went on to get a little bit further. We'll see Trump coin in just a bit. But a lot of these are now cooling off, which is very normal. If you want to day trade on its own merits, you can, of course, zoom in here to the smaller time frames. So what do we see? On Ethereum, you have the buy side sweep. Didn't quite take the big swing high, but that's fine. You did take a significant wick right there. But now you have some displacement right here. Enter short anywhere in this zone. Bearish, change in the state of delivery. Enter short. So this is still active. You can probably catch this if you're watching the chart. Maybe if you trade up a little higher, enter short. At least target probably this consequent encroachment level, about 4K. Always good to front run it a little bit. Sometimes you don't always get to the wicks. I think that this particular consolidation is being drawn to this level right here. So bears have the ball. I think we're still, until proven otherwise, in this uptrend. You do have now some equal highs over here, but they're not perfect, so it is a lower high. But FOMC is going to be the thing. I'm not expecting anything too crazy out of the tomorrow, Tuesday consolidation. Let me clean up some of these lines over here. I think we're just going to be hanging out sideways until Wednesday. And Wednesday's hopefully when we're going to see some more fireworks. Aster. All right, Aster's been a little bit of a disappointment. We did see some of that weakness with the 1 106 sweep over here. So let's just zoom in a little bit. We did expect a little bit more consolidation, especially since the market itself was looking a little bit weak, but you're starting to fail. So you didn't really want to take this low down over here at about 106. We're now below our typical entry line on the 8-hour. And we're starting to challenge this wick down over here as well. So Astra's not looking great. You already took some buy side over here. You don't really have any clean highs, equal highs that I'm drawn to, perhaps the 125 from this point and this point. But I think we're unfortunately a little bit weak here. Let's go ahead and redraw our lines. What do we think is going to happen? Now, obviously, we're making lower lows. Maybe you can sweep that low over there. Unfortunately, it looks like we're coming for the stop loss over here. You typically want to respect these, even though it might feel like it's just going to wick it and return. Typically, it does do that just because market makers love to run for stop losses. You need to be disciplined. If this gets stopped out, unfortunately, that's just losing trade. We go on to the next one and hopefully make some compounding returns over time. For now, I think we're okay. We've got the lows holding. We do have a bit of a downdraft here. So we really want to start reclaiming some of these levels. So I would say about that 125, we want to start clearing and then ultimately, hopefully starting to trend upwards. ADA. Well, what do you know? So it looks like our consolidation played out. We took that swing high over here at about 68.55. There were some equal highs over here, so that was a very good target. If you were watching the Bitcoin SMT, you would have taken profit into that resistance right there. But this is okay for now. I'm not really loving that we're now starting to go sideways. You're starting to just bore out the market. So this is just sideways consolidation, correction in time. But what you do have, unfortunately, this inverted head and shoulders is not very deep. So I wouldn't expect many people would have traded these wicks over here. You definitely did stop them out on the stab down. And you probably do have some other liquidity down here. I guess the point is that I don't think these are very strong lows. Let's still go ahead and zoom out here on the daily. So if we do start to just not get any traction to the upside, we're probably coming down here to the 50-cent handle. Like I mentioned when I was talking about Ethereum, some of the Elliott Wave people are calling for a November bottom. So we're still going to be hopeful. We did take that swing high over there. We erased a little bit of bearish divergence on that swing right there. So we are going to be waiting until FOMC. I think we can at least target the 75 over here if the market gets excited. But for now, unfortunately, we're looking a little bit weaker. I would have liked this to have pumped by now. We're getting some rejection. Let's take a look at some of these smaller time frames. We're starting to deliver in bearish order flow. You can see low, lower low. Not quite some displacement. Let's look at the hour. Now these altcoins are a little bit wicky, so you don't want to give them too much weight on the lower time frame. So you have displacement down there. So it's not looking great, not a great look. You'd like to be making the higher highs. We are now transitioning from the bullish delivery now to bearish. But this is normal. Consolidation. Perhaps on Wednesday we can see something happen here. Dogecoin. All right, so we had the first leg line up pretty nicely. We had drawn this little bit of a bear flag, a little bit of a wedge. You can, some people are purists. They say bear flags have to be perfectly symmetrical. I call them all bear flags if they're in this upwards type of angle, whether the channels are symmetric or not. Let me go ahead and redraw that wick a little bit. But point is, we got to the top of that wick over there, took some liquidity. So a lot of these charts, honestly, are acting very nicely, very technically. To me, that's saying there's not a whole lot of retail interest here because typically if you have very excited participants, they're not going to respect these levels as well. You're really dealing with other traders in that environment. Unfortunately for our longs, that's called PvP, meaning that you're going to get typical rejections at typical levels, and whether you can say that's a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you trade. If you'd like to get a nice trending market, you would like to see people just holding and pushing the trades further. If you like mean reversion and the reversal here on the smaller time frames, this is your playground, right? So perfect take profit right there. Get that rejection. Maybe you can reload into the imbalance over here on the 4-hour. And that's currently where we are. So a lot of these charts in their own way are now consolidating here until FOMC Wednesday. My eye is drawn though to this bear flag. I think that's the dominant pattern. So what I'm going to do for now to keep this chart a little bit cleaner, let me go ahead and delete that line right there. I think the pattern over here, this bear flag, is more dominant. Simply that's what my eye is drawn to. Let's go ahead and draw some liquidity up here. It looks like we've got a bigger imbalance over there as well at about 22 cents. And what are we doing? I think we're waiting. So you can try to position here into support. Maybe test the challenge, the top of the channel up there, something like that. But I wouldn't expect a whole ton of exciting things until Wednesday. So we might just go sideways until tomorrow. Solana. All right, nothing really new to talk about Solana here. This one was a really good choice because of the strength of the market. You could kind of see that contrary to a lot of these other coins, this one has been not so much consolidating sideways. It's just kind of been trending up. So that's been pretty nice for us. So our lines, I think, are acting pretty well. It's very tight. I was expecting a slightly higher move into the 211 handle over here. We might still get that. I think a lot of the market is just hanging out, waiting for Bitcoin, waiting for FOMC. I think we're looking at something like this still. It's looking weak. We could be having lower highs. If you start losing some of the levels down here, so I think you would want to, at minimum, hold this imbalance right here, right under 200. You actually want to probably hold 200. We're actually battling that for now. And then if not that, at least this zone over here at about 188. If you start losing those, you're inverting supports and you're starting to look more bearish. But at least on the small time frames, this chart's looking pretty good. You're making the higher lows. Had a little bit of a sell-off here, so you're bull flagging. That could be good. Maybe we're going to test down here into the 196, 195. You got a nice little shelf here. Not to make this chart too cluttered, but you do have a bit of a flat right here. So I would expect, now that I'm seeing some of the smaller time frames, perhaps more of a downdraft. And this is where we're going to decide, are we going to be bullish for FOMC or are we going to break down? I'll leave it bullish. That's what the trend right here is telling me. You got tons of support here to support it, but we are going to have to observe what it does. We won't be able to know, of course, without seeing the actual candles. The Legend of Link. So this is looking pretty good as well. We have a deeper backtest going on here. So once again, if you were watching Bitcoin, you were able to take a little bit of profit as you went into resistance there. The link chart itself doesn't look like it really cleared any equal high. So that's actually a bit of a bad point for the bulls. I would like to have at least taken out this 1918 over here. As of now, you are rejecting. So let me go ahead and redraw this arrow. And you're starting to look a little bit more bearish, aren't you? You are currently into a pretty nice support, I would say, if you're actually trying to position bullish. The thing that really gives me pause is that we're going to be positioning ahead of a high impact news event, but the entry, typically you like to use the 8-hour here, so whatever candle you close on your support, in that case, as you close black, that's going to be your anchor candle. So assuming we close around here and the green candle is positive in the next print, you would enter at the wick. So as you cross, that's your long entry. This is going to be trigger based. We're not going to enter on the test. We do want the market to prove itself a little bit. Of course, you can see this a little bit nicer on the smaller time frames. You can see it's starting to stop hunt a little bit. So let me go ahead and draw this to the bottom wick over here. That's probably what we're being drawn to, is this 18 handle. But I think we're just going to be waiting. So you would like to see a little bit of a deeper stab, maybe something like this, and then start making that uptrend. Ideally, try to position on a swing low down here. So for now, it looks okay. If the FOMC wasn't looming on the Wednesday, I think this is actually a pretty good entry, honestly. But I would like to see that sweep first. Right now, it's going to be around midnight, so not a whole lot of action. We are making the lower lows. I would really like to see that sweep low. So 9 times out of 10, every time I don't wait for it, it'll eventually sweep it. And I'll be upset because I've got a bad entry and I'm taking a loss. But that's Link. So we're going to be waiting. We're probably going to consolidate. I would expect that swing low to take. If you want to watch the small time frames, you can try that position on that wick. But more likely than not, we're going to see a pretty explosive move. I think whatever Bitcoin decides to do, the market will follow. And we should know that by about Wednesday afternoon. BNB. All right, we'll be quick about this one. It's been one of the stronger coins, kind of like Solana. It's been more of a pronounced and sustained uptrend. We had that beautiful retest. You're able to get in once. If you're not there, you got in twice. I think you're going to still be targeting some of these swing highs. Now, I would probably do this as a time-based. You might even roll this to break even. In fact, I kind of like that considering we have a little bit of the imbalance here lining up with the swing low. So I think that's how we want to treat this. That's just me being a little bit conservative. You can also say that perhaps the imbalance over here was the target and close right now. I think you're still fine. You can play it like this. The wicks up here aren't super strong targets. The market is weak. A lot of these other altcoins aren't really sustaining their pumps. But you could also argue on the smaller time frames that we're just retesting a little bit of a shelf here. So I don't love this chart. I think it's still fine to stay long on this coin, but if we start losing some of these lows, you have some equal lows right here. That's not good, especially if Bitcoin starts breaking down. You can fall very quickly to fill in that wick. Not loving the tweezer here, so if I were holding this trade, I'm not. I would probably at least trim some and roll the stop to break even here, but that's BNB. Let's check on DOT. So DOT's doing fine. Like I mentioned on ADA, I would have liked this to have just a lot more strength, but it's so timid over here. It's really not doing anything, and we're probably, unfortunately, going to be stuck here into consolidation until Wednesday. So right now, I don't really have an edge. I think you're just going to be stuck here for another day or so. Wednesday FOMC. Let's see, you did take the swing highs over here, so you've already consumed that. You have the bigger imbalance. This is also unfortunately going to be resistance. A lot of the people that have gotten into this chart are going to want to get out of the market. So you did repair that already. I think we're just going to be waiting to see what the market does. If this fails, this is a lot like ADA. A lot of these lows aren't very far apart. So you could unfortunately see a little bit of a sell-off here. I'm trying to see if there's any supports, but it looks like this is the bottom of the market. So a bit of a hairy position. We are consolidating towards the lows. That does tend to build up more liquidity as people try to fish for these longs over here. But we're going to want to get some strength, I would say sooner than later. The pattern looks fine. A lot of these charts have the flagging right there. So I think you're fine until you start losing some of these bigger swing lows. And of course, if you lose that bottom swing low, that would be bad. XLM. XLM is a really good example of a coin that it really tried to get going, but it was stopped pretty significantly, unfortunately. So our rallies that we've been looking for, they're all getting stomped on. Now this is fine. I really like this setup because what you're also doing, you didn't stab that far. You did sweep it, so do keep that in mind, but you do have a lot of equal highs here. If there is any cause for a bullish narrative or a bullish initiative here in the market, I think you're going to pop this very easily. For now, though, you are making the lower lows, so you're starting to flag out a little bit. I think you're fine. You can try to position here on the trend line. I don't love it. So this is just telling me that the market is still very indecisive. As oversold as this market is, I think you're probably going to have to consolidate a little bit more. Now, hopefully what we're looking for is this inverted head and shoulders. That would be lovely if you could enter perhaps here on the right-hand leg. As is, I don't love that we've already taken the liquidity. We're making lower lows. The market just does not seem eager to go up. It gave it back all pretty quickly, unfortunately. If you start swinging some of these lows over here, I think you're not looking great. Litecoin. Okay, Litecoin is a little bit stronger. So we actually tested into the imbalance here. This is a really nice setup. So what I keep saying is that we're really expecting this imbalance to get cleared very quickly. The next chart we're going to see, the Trump coin, is actually going to show a pretty good example of that. So if you guys were playing that, well done. But right here, what are we doing? We're consolidating. So we took a lot of these swing lows. So contrary to the other charts, this is something to keep in mind. This is actually showing a strength, and I think this is a really good example. So if you take a look down here at about the 97.49, if you remember some of the previous charts, they actually took that liquidity and they rejected, and they're starting to flag, which is fine. You know, maybe they're building some more liquidity and they're eventually going to pop it. But you can see on the Litecoin chart over here, we actually slipped, but then cleared, back tested, cleared. Now you are rejecting from this big imbalance over here. I think that's going to be your final boss. You also got a ton of resistance over here, right here, at about 100 psychological level. So I think this is going to be a pretty tough level to beat. Most likely sideways consolidation. I think you're fine. The trend here is a little bit more defined, so you have a nice ascending triangle. I never really liked this pattern. I think you're going to hear me say that pretty much every time. I don't mind the head and shoulders as much. I think they're just easy to see, but I'm not a big fan of this pattern for whatever reason. But you have the wick right there. You can connect there, and then just draw the flat top. Ideally, hypothetically, what you're going to see is just some more consolidation, maybe backfill a little bit. Then on that Wednesday, you would like to see this exceed with a lot of momentum. Of course, you can also break down, start losing some of the lows. That would be really bad. You already took into the liquidity over here, so we are at risk of that displacing down on this particular candle. We can look at the smaller time frames. So you are rejecting, and you are probably going to start making some more bearish delivery patterns. So just keep that in mind. Consolidation is fine though. No problems in that. But I think we're just going to be on watch. Typically this pattern, the ascending triangle, is bullish. It's harder to play out in a overall bear market, so I think we are bottoming. If we do get that November sell-off, then around the 15th, I think is when we're going to want to try to take another stab at the longs. For now, showing a little bit of weakness. I don't like the strong punch down. I don't like the displacement, but you do have the equal highs and big imbalance. So pick your poison. Trump coin. All right, so this one actually played off. And I will say I don't think I traded this perfectly, but if you remember from the last video, we were looking at something like this with the trend lines. I think we're actually a little bit lower, about here in the 5.8 area. But you can see how quickly this thing got away from us. So once you started to break out of this trend right here, maybe you can draw this trend a little bit like that. I like the breakout, retest, resumption. So an entry right about over here would have been fantastic, right there after the black candle. So what's nice is you don't even have to risk a whole lot. Maybe you risk that little swing low over here. But so my trade looked a lot like this. I just took the 6.22. I wanted that swing high. I had no idea it would go all the way up to challenge the swing high over there at $8. That would have been nice to hold on. But here's the reason why. So you can't really get too greedy in the market. So the big takeaway is that you never really know what the market is going to do. I definitely did not think we were going to have this magnificent run here. We can actually get our measurement tool to see how big this leg was. It was a pretty big clip. Nothing too crazy in crypto world's 30%. That's really good for a couple of hours of work, considering we scouted this out and we positioned ahead of time. But you can see you had a big rejection down over here. So once you never really know where it's going to reject. It could have rejected right here. You would have lost everything. It could have rejected right here at some older resistances. Ultimately, it went all the way up to 8 and selling off pretty sharply. About 14%. It looks a lot worse than it is, but ultimately, you don't really want to give too much back. You want to try to just pair your greed with what you think is realistic. Now, of course, if you're watching the hours, maybe you could have seen that on the hourly close, you're starting to have a 3-bar reversal. So that's these three candles right here. You got a nice little doji in the middle, imbalance, imbalance, reversal. So maybe on that close, that would be your take profit signal. I just decided to take the easy liquidity here, sell into that resistance. Of course, the winners here sold into the big $8 resistance up there. But we're pulling back pretty sharp. So where does Trump coin go next? I'm not really sure, honestly. I would like to see if this is bullish to hold the big trend line. So maybe you're going to try to get here back in at 660. This is a meme coin though. So what you can try to do is see previous breakout attempts. Let's see if we can find any. It looks like, unfortunately, it likes to give a lot back. So we can see perhaps this pump over here. So right here, pump, gave it back. Pump, didn't quite give it all the way back, about half back, but eventually bled out a while. So this tends to be a pump and dump coin. You probably don't want to hold this one, and you're going to want to line up another big breakout. Now, what does a sustained run look like? Fortunately, we've never really had one. So this has always been a pump and dump coin. So what you're going to be wanting to look for is higher lows. So if we can find our footing over here somewhere, I would say let's take a look at the daily. It's hard to estimate with these meme coins because they're so chaotic potentially, and you can see how quickly they can move. I would think if you can at least hold our box down here, I know it's going to be quite a bit far away. If you can at least hold our $6 handle, I think that's probably what a uptrend is looking like. And what do you have here? So now you have some equal highs here at 8. That would be a lovely target if you're trying to be bullish. And then of course you have all these nice targets up and above. Always hard to know what to do in the meantime, but what are we doing with Trump? I think we're just hanging out. So if you caught this trade, well done. You should have taken profit. I can't really tell you what to do with your coins. You can try it along into the trend line test over here. It's not my favorite. I don't think this chart is going to respect trend lines that nicely. That being said, we actually got the long over here, so maybe, what am I saying? So maybe if you're being very aggressive, you can try to do something like this. Personally, I don't love it. I don't think we want to touch it. We probably just want to look at different coins for now. All right, and there you have it. So pretty exciting week. We had a couple of these breakouts. Some of the coins, a handful, are a little bit stronger. We looked at Solana. We looked at Trump. I think we looked at one other. Litecoin was another good example. Bitcoin had a pretty nice heavy resistance there, and a lot of these other coins, if you were watching their resistances as well, they rejected around the same place. So the market is still very timid, I would say. We're still consolidating very clearly until Wednesday. So whether we get the green light then or whether we get a sell signal, we're going to see some of these trend lines either hold or break. So depending on if I'm here, I'm actually going to be traveling on Wednesday. I'll try to make a video on the night of, no promises, but I'll still be tweeting if you guys want to follow me and FireJackal42. I'll be posting some of my thoughts up there whenever I see something good. But if we don't talk, you guys have a good week. Good luck. Stay safe.